Afternoon or evening. Eric Francis back with you with another edition of Planet Waves TV. Bit spontaneous. There have been some interesting developments overnight, and I didn't mention the chart for the State of the Union address, so I'll keep this short and to the point. But I did want to mention that this is some really exciting astrology. Most of it centered around the moon's movement through the sign Gemini. So as you may know, there is a delay in announcing the results of the Iowa caucus. The Iowa caucus is the first of the Democratic primaries, and it's considered a kind of a bellwether of how the Democratic primaries are going to go, and in some ways a bellwether for the election itself. It's the first of something. It's therefore, there's a bit of whether it's planned or intentional or not, a bit of augury that people do when something is the first thing. Like, what's the thing that happens when the first thing happens? How does it go at the beginning? And the way it's gone at the beginning is not so good, because the results are not out yet, and apparently there has been some kind of a debacle with the digital app that is being used for people to cast their votes in this caucus. Now, I just am frankly stunned that any election authority is allowing people to vote from their smartphone. That participation in a national election process of some kind is not only happening on an electronic machine, which is bad enough, and I think is a perfectly horrendous idea, because this stuff is just not secure. We've just seen this over and over again. It's completely inside out and blowing in the wind, and then to do this from personal devices that feed into some kind of a central system just seems ridiculous, and we're getting a taste of how ridiculous that is. The system wasn't tested, and the possibility of there being some nefarious activity cannot be ruled out. I mean, we spent more than 20 months of our lives tracking the special counsel's investigation into Russian election meddling, which include all various forms of hacking and manipulation through social media, and now we've just endured an impeachment process that seems to be concluding tomorrow. That's also about election meddling, and so election meddling has just been the theme of the entire Trump administration. And so when the Democratic primary goes belly up or goes south or go whatever way you want to think it might go, on the night of the first election, that is worth noting, and I think we have to set aside the notion of a coincidence at this point. But I want to show you what this looks like astrologically. I know that it's not easy to follow this stuff for people who are not astrologically trained, but the way that you acquire the skills is you just watch and you listen and you read, and I have plenty at planetwaves.net, and everything I do, particularly my articles, not so much my horoscopes, but my articles are all expository writing, and you'll pick up at least a few hints for reading charts in every article, and one thing to realize is that there's not cut and dried interpretations or definitions of what's going on, that everything is basically a hint, a clue, an inference, and then someone who's got the gift of gab, as I happen to seem to have, puts together the narrative in a way that's cohesive. And sometimes the theme is relatively clear, as it is in this case. So here's the chart, and I've got to now figure out how to do this. So that's the moon. Where is that? How's this coming in? Okay, this left is equal right and right equals left. This is the moon at a minute to midnight last night. Turn my microphone a little bit to make sure the sound is good. A minute to midnight. The moon was at 9 degrees of Gemini. And I've drawn some purple lines here to show that the moon is making an aspect to Nessus at that time. Nessus it's not an asteroid. It's an important centaur planet, the third centaur planet, and it's a planet associated with consequences, and it is itself a bit nefarious. There's There's something a bit conspiratorial and dishonest potentially with Nessus, and then there's also the matter of accountability. One of the key phrases when you boil Nessus down to its bare essence is the buck stops here. And look at how close that aspect is. The moon at a minute to midnight last night is at 9:45 Gemini, and that's at 9:47 Pisces. That is an exact square. Then when the moon's done making the square to Nessus, it makes it to Neptune, which it's doing right now as I speak. And when the moon Neptune square is exact throughout, right? Neptune has a very wide orb of influence, and when anything gets anywhere near it, it's picking up the quality of Neptune. And the quality of Neptune is there's an uncertainty. There can be a deception quality, a delusion quality, a denial quality, deceit. A lot of D words factor into Neptune: drink, drugs, etc., and inspiration, right? It's also a planet of inspiration, but Neptune is easy to corrupt, and people tend to go into denial very generously. They're generous with themselves about going into denial and pretending that everything's just lovely and there's nothing to worry about. That's kind of, in a sense, where we are. So all day yesterday, all night last night, and all day today, Moon square Neptune. And so if you're learning astrology and keeping a notebook, which I suggest, get yourself a notebook and take notes on the things that you hear. You have to assemble a lot of disparate data to do this. This is a kind of a classic textbook example of a Moon Neptune event. One more thing. I'm seeing him up to 7 minutes. I may end up going a little bit longer. Let's take a look briefly at the Mercury retrograde situation. Mercury is about to be retrograde in a couple of weeks, and it's going to go from 12 Pisces back to 28 Aquarius. So Mercury is now in what's called shadow phase, and it is therefore making its first trek through the degrees where it will be retrograde. And so the retrograde effect is coming on. It's beginning to happen. Things are getting a little weird. And as I've said a number of times, the thing that all the different effects of Mercury retrograde have in common is us, our mind. What is a late train and a broken computer and a check stuck in the pages of a magazine that you missed until you caught a new check and then deposited it and found the old check? They all have in common, they have us in common. And so we need to remember that in many ways, Mercury retrograde is receptor mediated. Astrology is happening to us. It's happening in consciousness. And the thing to bear in mind is astrology is a phenomenon of human consciousness. It's not a thing separate from consciousness. The planets out there, they have their existence and all that, but ultimately we're on the trip. It's about us. Okay, so we're in the retrograde thing, and it's in Pisces, and so therefore it's a bit foggy and mystical. Okay, next, State of the Union address. Here's the punchline. So by tonight, at 9 o'clock, the moon has gone past the square to Neptune, which is at 17 degrees. See that 17? This tells you where things are. So by tonight, the moon has gone all the way out to 20 degrees. So you can see that from last night at midnight, Iowa time, to tonight, the moon has moved 11 degrees. That's about right. The moon moves about somewhere between 11 and 14 degrees a day. And what's so humorous about this moon is that it's opposite Mars. It's in Gemini, first of all, meaning that there's possibilities for many different points of view, but also a lot of bluster and also mental chatter and also polarization. Opposite Mars. So the aspect that's happening while the State of the Union address happens is the moon in Gemini opposite Mars in Sagittarius. You can see it's opposite because the moon is at 20, Mars is at 21, and then probably about an hour during the State of the Union address, the moon is going to be opposite Mars, and that says things like divisive and pissed off, and the public having a response or a reaction. In this chart, the moon happens to represent the 11th house, which is the public, and so I am. I'm going to watch this speech if I can stand it. They tend to go too long, and I think we're going to see a lot of swagger and bravado. And remember that we're now in a new age of American history where basically the result of the impeachment is that assuming that Trump is acquitted tomorrow on Wednesday, the result of the impeachment is that it is okay for the president to mess with elections. The theme of Watergate was it's not okay for the president to mess with elections, and the president had to resign. And now we're in this kind of postmodern world where that doesn't seem to matter to people all that much. And then there was an impeachment, and the Senate voted for no witnesses in a trial. I mean, I'm smiling because it's ironic, but this is more dangerous than we may think. The purpose of witnesses, as I explained on Planet Waves FM this week, is to get to the truth of things. And if we don't want to hear testimony of people who know the truth, there's something wrong. And there's something wrong with the system that can tolerate this, and there's something wrong with any person who doesn't want to know the truth. And it is not easy to get through to people when they are in that state. And so since my primary role here is not as a political commentator, but as a personal commentator, I would encourage you to make sure that you have, at least in your life, set a value on knowing the truth, and that you be willing to seek the underlying reality behind the appearances. Thanks for listening. There's lots of good stuff on the brand new website at planetwaves.net. If you are a fan of my radio program, all the old editions are archived at planetwaves.fm. They're also the current ones are also on planetwaves.net. There's lots of stuff. There's a music channel. There's the monthly horoscope, and lots of really excellent astrology articles. Please do spread the word. Please do subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, and bye for now.